morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Keepers of the Water, Protecting Water in the Arctic Basin and Current Threats to Water. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health, and we'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations today. Before we formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Please feel free to introduce yourself and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box below. Today's learning circle will be exploring Keepers of the Water, protecting water in the Arctic Basin and the current threats to water. I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves in just a few moments. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Thrain Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I'm Syilx Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory, Apache, and Belgian on my father's side. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion, and joining you working behind the scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Kira and Nicole, our production assistants. They'll be in the background interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we formally begin, we will get into today's discussion. I will provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you feel that you are looking after yourself, and if at any point you feel that you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat if you need additional support. Now I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
All right, I'll start. Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel Taselli. I'm Dene. My people, my nation is Kashagotene. It's one of the many Dene nations. I'm from Radley Cove, which is called Fort Good Hope on the map. It's a small community just south of the Arctic Circle. And I work as the NWT Outreach Manager for Keepers of the Water. Merci. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Tanse, Kitatamskat Nawal. I greet you all. My name is Jessie Cardinal. I'm from the community of Kikino. Kikino is a Cree word. It means our home. And it's in Treaty 6 territory. It's a Métis settlement. There's only 8 in all of Canada, and they're in what's colonially called Canada, and in colonially what's called Alberta. And I'm currently serving as the Executive Director of Keepers of the Water. Of course, as Indigenous people, we wear many hats. So that's one of the hats that I wear and how I'm showing up for you today. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Serene and Kira, Nicole, and Cynthia for putting this together and working with us and communicating with us to ensure that you know that our message is heard for all of those who will be watching this video. I wanted to start, so the way we're doing this this presentation for you all is Daniel and I work together. We've been working together for quite a while now with Keepers of the Water. Daniel's new to Keepers of the Water, but he's been doing this work for a long time. And so we have discussed that we'll both tell you a little bit about who we are and our relationship to the land and water, our own personal relationships, and how we came to, you know, be water protectors and land protectors. And then I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the organization Keepers of the Water and some of the work that we do. And then Daniel will get into, he's a lawyer by non-practicing lawyer. So we deal a lot with governments and politics. It's unavoidable in the work that we do. And so we want to talk about the impacts to Indigenous, you know, our roles and responsibilities to have that relationship with water and to protect water, and how that's been impacted in many ways through colonialism, through the legal and all of these. So Daniel will talk about that. So I just wanted to introduce you guys a little bit more about me. I don't always do presentations like this, but I thought I will today, of just showing you guys. I just want to share a little PowerPoint I put together. So Wakotuin, that's a Cree word. So I've been taking the Cree language program at the University of Blue Quills since 2015. I grew up around the Cree language, Nehiawe, when all the elders growing up, they all spoke the Cree language, and my parents didn't learn it, so I didn't learn it, just whatever we were taught, which wasn't much. And that had been because I'm one of those people, I'd write these vision boards, and in my early 20s I found a note that I wrote to myself, and on one of my goals or visions was to learn the Cree language. So it finally came to be in 2015, because there comes to a point where you got to do it or it's not going to happen. And so Blue Quills University, it's located in Treaty 6 territory, and they're working really hard to keep both the Cree language and the Dene language alive. And they have an excellent Cree language program. So I started taking that program while working and whatever else. And it changed my life. It completely changed my life because it gave me grounding, it gave me healing, and it just made my relationship to the land and to the water that much stronger, because I was able to um be able to say the words, like be out on the land and know that the sky had another word for it, and in that word held so much more meaning than just what the English language does. And so that was part of my journey. So Wakoto, and it means all our relationships, and that we're all related. And this is one of the things that when an elder recently taught me was that, and I've been sharing this, is that we all have a spirit. And so, the grass has a spirit, the firefly has a spirit, the rabbit has a spirit, everything has a spirit, and all of the spirits are the same. We're, even as a human being, we have a spirit, but our spirit isn't bigger than the firefly spirit. All of our spirits are the same in the spirit world. And it really just added to my building of that relationship with everything, that we're all related. And so when we're out on the land, that you can talk to the tree, you can talk to a bird, and that your spirits are the same. Nobody is above anybody. And so this is some of my family. I don't know if you guys see that part. So these are the people who helped raise me. I have my parents, Ninigigwa, Gwenegwa, Sandra Cardinal, Nota Onegigwa, so my dad's parents, Francis Pan Negwa, Alice Pan Cardinal. They've passed on. Nigawi Onegigwa, my mom's parents, Harrison Cardinal Pan Igwa, Louise Cardinal Pan, they've passed on. These are my papa's parents. So my papa was from Saddle Lake, Cree Nation, and it's thanks to him that I was able to be around ceremony growing up. And thankfully my mom, she said, like, however you want to pray, that's up to you, as long as you have a relationship with Creator. And so that relationship has been building more, kind of parallel with me learning the languages. I've been learning more about ceremony and participating in it. And so everybody has their own relationship with Creator, and however you choose to have that nurture that, because we find that in different ways, and it's all valid. And the Nutigueo here, Stella, that's my chapon, so that's my Musham's mom. And that's who I named my daughter after. She had a big impact in my life. She was with me up until my 20s, and just one of the most kind, caring, sweet people that I've ever met in my life. And that kindness gave me a foundation, despite everything that all of these people have been through as Indigenous people. that there was so much kindness and love taught to us. And you'll hear that in many Indigenous communities, because yes, there's lots of trauma. Yes, there's lots of, intergenerational trauma, but we often forget to nurture and talk about those people in our life that impacted us in a good way. And we need to highlight that more, because there's so many good, loving, kind, and caring people, despite the traumatic colonization that they've experienced. And that was the first time I ever heard about residential school, was from my chaplain Stella, and we were sitting in church of all places, and she told me she had this long, beautiful hair, and I always remember she made this motion, this cutting motion, that they cut her hair. I never knew, I never understood the significance of what she was telling me, because we weren't taught it in school at that time. And it wasn't until later, after high school, because we didn't learn that in high school, that she was sharing an experience with me, and so I just wanted to, kind of give you guys a little inside look at me. And so these are all pictures that I took. I was telling the ladies that my old computer died, so I don't have access to all that stuff until I get it extracted. So this is off my Canva, but still some good photos. And as you're out on the land, the more you go out, like I like going for walks, by myself, but I'm out in my community, so it's safe where I am. You see things, and just these birds with the reflection of their own reflection, and the water. And one thing I want to share with you guys about water is that, because we're made up of mostly water, is how we are water beings. These birds are water beings, but we are also water beings, and we need to, first of all, even know that that's a thing, that we are a water being, because we're made up of mostly water. And so you'll notice when you go out and you're outside, and you're driving in your vehicle, and you pass a body of water and the sun is shining on it, and you have that glistening off the water, your body feels something positive just by looking at that glistening of water, because that's your water in your spirit responding to that spirit of the water, because that's the spirit of the water. That glistening is like it's a beautiful, fuzzy, warm feeling when you see it, and automatically your body feels that. That's your water spirit responding to that. I just need to check the chat here. Okay. Yeah, I only have a few slides, so these are more pictures that I took out on the land. This one of this, I think it's an eagle or a hawk, a heel. And I was sitting in my brother's yard. We were waiting, and I happened to have my camera, because I was taking a lot of photos at that time. I zoomed in on this bird, and I noticed it had a fish. I was just meant to be. And it just brought me hope that, first of all, there's fish in our small lake, because we get our drinking water from the bigger lake, but the small lake, this is where this bird would have got the fish from. And just the cycle of life, and that there's more out there than just us, and that there's a whole world out there of living beings, and that we all exist together. This isn't just our home, it's all of our home. And this is the beaver, a misk, and he is one of the water keepers. And so he has a sacred responsibility, or she, to keep the water. And they are one of the hardest workers. Like, if you guys ever go out in the bush where beavers live, and you see some of the trees that they cut down and move, like, they're massive. Like, I don't know how these beavers do it. Like, maybe they're given extra spiritual powers that we don't even see, because some of these trees are big that they move. And and where there's places that are dry, they'll build a little dam, and all of a sudden you'll go there in a year or two, and it's just full of water, and all of a sudden there's life there. There's animals coming to drink, and there's all kinds of bugs and birds. So it's just amazing how how they protect water and take care of water. And this is my last slide. This gets into now our work with Keepers of the Water is we're a diverse organization. So we're a small organization. We're growing. Maybe one day I won't say we're a small organization, but we do a lot because it's our responsibility. And so we get called from all different directions, like to, you know, the decolonization work of getting back to the land and all like high level legal and political work. So we're diverse in that way. And one of the things that we do is we've been partnering for the past 3 years with Kaniasik Culture Camps. They are a Cree land-based learning camp in Saskatchewan in Treaty 6 in a community called Ministiguan. And you can look them up, Kaniasik, because if you guys are looking for a place to go connect with the land, they offer like hide tanning camps, canoe making camps. They have dog sledding in the winter. It's really remote and beautiful, and the Cree language, you can hear it everywhere. So if you're looking for that cultural experience, reach out to them. And so Keepers of the Water, this was our last gathering that we did last year. We bring in elders to provide medicine teachings and water teachings. It changes every year. Like last year, they happened to get a moose just before the camp. So they had this moose that they were like cutting up throughout the whole camp, and we were eating fresh moose for the entire camp. And we had beading sessions. So it changes every year. Food security is a big thing as well. And it's all tied together, just like we're related to everything. Food security and clean water, it's all related. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, just to give you a little bit more personal view of like who we are and our relationship to the water and to the land. So now I want to talk a little bit about our organization, and then after I do that, I'm going to hand it over to Daniel. As we're going along, if you have questions, jot them down as the Learning Center or the Learning Circle from the University of BC, they're tracking all the questions, and we definitely are going to make time for questions and conversations after. So I'm just going to ask Cynthia to bring up our Keepers of the Water website. So this organization that we work for right now, it was formed in 2006 by the Dene people up in Northwest Territories. There was non-Indigenous people there as well, but the Dene people were the ones who helped this organization form. And at that time, when it was formed up in Northwest Territories, there was in 2006, there was a lot of concerns with water. The people were seeing the water levels dropping, and they were also seeing the quality of the water was changing, which was affecting the food they eat, because all the food is from the land. So like the fish, the moose, the deer, the muskrat, everything was, the taste of the food, the texture of the food. There was like two fish with lesions. I've heard of like two-headed fish, like all of these like phenomenons that were all happening all at once. In the community of Fort Chipewyan, people were starting to have high rates of rare cancer. So this cancer that you're only supposed to see every once in a while throughout the world was all of a sudden becoming readily like seen a lot in the community of Fort Chip, which was bile duct cancer. And that's, we believe it's because of the food that they eat and the impacts. So the tar sands, or some of you may know it as the oil sands, is located. So everything that comes out of this tar sands flows up north. We call it downstream, but it's like all into the Arctic Ocean. So we feel that it's affecting the water. So at that time in 2006, there was a declaration made that, water is sacred and that we must work to protect it. There was a real coming together of, we need to take this seriously, and we need to come together and work together to honor water because it's our life giver. And from then on, Keepers of the Water has been an organization, and we've accomplished a lot collectively with communities and the board members and the staff over the years of protecting water. And so that's why I wanted to show you a little bit about our website, just so you have an idea of some of the work we're currently doing. And after this, feel free to go to our website and have a deeper look. So the video I want to show you, this is one of the elders that has been with Keepers of the Water for a long time. She's still alive, thankfully. I just seen her 2 weeks ago. We were up in Hinton visiting a First Nation there for water. And she's one of our mentors and advisors, and she's a residential school survivor. If you go to our YouTube channel, we have a YouTube channel, Keepers of the Water. You can hear more of her sharing about her experiences of residential school. She's Dene, and she's just really helps us ensure that, you know, never to forget our responsibility of protecting water. So we'll just watch this video now.
Sai two on the est here. Two head your city clear dealer. Two head is sunny dear all there. So two head did it long on ni, long the head lianoni, chero dear. No harbour very real to 2 years will in yonder. Jadon Jacobson, I don't know what's again there. When we were growing up, water was beautiful. You could drink water right out of the lake, you could drink water out of the rivers, you could drink water out of the muskets, the sloughs. They were clean. Today you can't touch any of that. There's no way you can touch any of that water. Now I can't tell my grandchildren, enjoy the water, go get yourself a dip of water. They too deserve to live like we live. Enjoy the beautiful trees like I do. A lot has been ruined. To me, the Indian app has committed treason against a sovereign nation. Water is something that is, to us, it's holy. Water is something that we should value because it's our body, it's our life. So I believe in this way of my native way, that respect that water, every bit of it, whether it's melted snow or whatever. Water is water, and we should hang on to it for all we're worth. Water is our first medicine. Without that water, we cannot drink our medicines that we make, tea that we make out of our medicines. The heart medicine. I used to go over here to go get my heart medicine. Last year, I went over there, my husband and I went over there to go get my heart medicine. And that white moss that sits on top, you know, out in the bushes, there's nice soft white moss. Well, the heart medicine, I dug it up and I pulled it up. And when I pulled it up, it was dead. There was no life in that heart medicine. So the heart medicine that's out here is no longer any use to anybody. But the only reason why the natives never talk about it is because once the scientists know about our medicine, they humanize our medicine. They tear it apart until there's nothing left of it. I knew of Greenpeace, I knew of Idle No More, and I knew of Keepers of the Water, but very little. I do have a lot of faith in Keepers of the Water. It's water that we all look after. keepers of the water is one thing that I am thankful for. And I'm asking you, everybody, let's help each other to save our water. We didn't know what climate change was when we were growing up. Our land and our water and our air was pure. Climate change is unbelievable. In the 50 years that I have been fighting for our land, it has been a tremendous change. It was clean. We have to be responsible, and let's be responsible. Let's look after Mother Earth here. Respect yourselves, respect the land that we're walking on, and respect the water. Keep our land clean. Keep our waters clean.
So that's a very powerful video. That's why it's on our homepage. It just summarizes everything that I've said, that just Nancy Scanny. And so I wanted to just give you guys a little quick intro to our website, because it shows some of the work that we do. And so under who we are, you can go there. It tells more about our story, our vision, our mission, our mandate, which all tie into protecting water. So when we're journeying and doing our work, we always ask, how does this relate to water? How does it relate to protecting water? And everything is related, like even renewable energy, you know, it's like, people will be like, well, you're a water protection organization. Why are you doing a pilot project on solar energy? And it's like, well, because that helps protect water. We have an Indigenous water governance, so that's something that we're still building out as we go along, of, you know, how building our worldview of what it means to protect water. And research, we do a lot of research. We partner with a lot of universities on research projects. I believe we've partnered with University of BC even on a corporate mapping project in the past. And so we always get asked, and if it fits and we have the time, we partner a lot on different research projects, because there's a lot of good people out there with knowledge and skills that also want to protect water. So we enjoy that work. More on the Arctic drainage basin. So that's the area of that's our area of focus. However, the elders tell us all water is connected. So don't ever limit yourselves if there's a partnership out in like Treaty 4 or wherever, and it's to do with protecting water, that we can do that, because all of the water is connected. Our focus is the Arctic drainage basin, which is massive, and so we try and do our part in protecting that. And then you can learn more about our staff and board of directors. We're governed by a board, and we have a growing staff and just amazing people from the communities. We're all Indigenous staff and a mostly Indigenous board. We do have some allies on our organization, and what an ally is that they acknowledge the harms of colonization and of genocide and doctrine of discovery, and you know, they understand that it's time for Indigenous people to lead, and for our voices to be heard and our teachings to be brought forward and taken seriously and honored. And so we have some amazing people there. Our sponsors and partners, we have to update that, because we have, you know, quite a few partners and sponsors. And if you're looking for a job, you know, we're always trying to, we have some research work coming up, and yeah, and then into our work. And so we have an events page now. We have a website, first of all. We didn't even have a website a while back. And now we have a full-time communications manager, and she's doing amazing work on our website, because we intend our website to be a useful resource tool for universities, for schools. And so we're in the next year, it's going to be growing even more. So we have an events page. We do a lot of partnering with communities. So we do online webinars, but we're also doing in-person events. We have one coming up in December in Edmonton. It's a legal summit. It's a 2-day conference. We're just going to be changing the cost of it because it's at $350, but the board's like, that's too much. So we're changing that. So don't be alarmed if you see that cost, because it'll be changed by the end of the day. We have amazing speakers coming to that, like lawyers, Indigenous people. I don't know if you guys have heard of Eleanor Sunchild and Janice McCocus, Sylvia McAdam, that's just to name a few. And so any events we have, that'll be posted there. So we have quite a bit. And then just some of our work that we do. So which we're going to be talking about in a little bit here with Daniel, is the tar sands and the tailings ponds. We have a community monitoring program, which we launched this year. So we're doing our own water monitoring. Our annual report, we'll have a new one up on our website this December. That one's from last December. And these are just all of the things. Go to our events and gatherings page, because that just, we take a lot of pictures when we're at our community events, and it's just a great way to have an inside look at the community. Yeah, we've been partnering with the University of Alberta and Council of Canadians on these in-person. We have 3 sessions in person just to talk about the tailings ponds. And that's we did a science one. The next one is Indigenous knowledge, which is next week. And then we have one, where do we go from here? Like we're letting people know that the fossil fuel industry is not sustainable. But part of our work is helping people understand that there's an alternative future, you know, and that we need to know what that looks like. If you can just go back to our work, there was just one thing I wanted to mention. So in educational resources and our work, so we'll have links going back, but our community monitoring page, we are going to be putting a map up that'll be coming live in the new year. It's going to be an interactive map. It's going to be an Indigenous map, and you'll be able to click on it and see the communities that we're monitoring in, and there'll be different layers of information on each community. So for instance, if you go to Kikino and you can see the data, so what we're monitoring. The difference with our monitoring program is we're going to make it understandable. We're not just going to drop data. We're going to explain, you know, what it is we're monitoring, why, what are the baselines, you know, use as much Indigenous language as we can. We've been doing interviews, video interviews with people from different communities. So you might click on a dot for Small Boy Camp and you'll be able to see interviews with some of the people. So we get asked by universities and schools all the time, like, do you have any educational resources we can use in our schools that are like Indigenous? And so that's part of us responding to that ask, is, you know, having these learning tools. So stay tuned to our website over the next year, because we'll be adding more resources and learning tools. And then finally, under educational resources, personhood is a thing that we have been working on. We have written a report, so we have a university professor, like we have doctors, lawyers, university professors, they're all Indigenous, and we all live in the community and we're land-based. So her and one of our staff co-authored a report on personhood, because that's something that we're exploring. So the date show, it's a Dene word, which means big river or mighty river. Daniel can clarify that after. And originally this river was called Mackenzie River, and that's part of the erasure of Indigenous people and the harms of colonization. Was some white guy was traveled down the river and he discovered the north. And they said, we're going to call this river Mackenzie River, and totally erased the existence of Indigenous people who were already there. And so that's part of this decolonization and reclaiming back our spaces. So it's called the Decho River, not the Mackenzie River. And that's one of the things we want to work on in the future, is having the provincial and federal governments change that on their maps as well. And that's part of the work we're all doing in all of our communities, is taking back our names. And so we are in the second stage of that work. And so now we're writing a second report, building on what does it look like to get personhood for the Decho River, and what will that involve? Because as you guys know, there's been personhood for the Magpie and a river in New Zealand, and just exploring that as an option to be able to protect water. So visit our website and have a look, and I would just want to show you guys, and yeah, that's all I have to say for now. And I want to pass it over to Daniel. I'm looking forward to hearing from him, and thank you all for listening and tuning in.
Right on. Thanks, Jesse. As Jesse said, I'm Daniel. I am a former lawyer, but I'm actually retired. I retired / surrendered my law licenses because I don't like that work and I don't like that lifestyle. I now do work that I enjoy, like working with Keepers of the Water. And I also work for my community on some of our rights issues that we're dealing with up here. And I've also been very fortunate to have a lot of good mentors over the years in nonviolent direct action, and even to the point where I dabble a little bit in NVDA trainings, and I've done that work at different forums like the United Nations, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, at Standing Rock, and worked with a lot of excellent people. And I think that work is very important in this struggle to actually defend the land and protect water. But more than talking about myself, I want to talk about my people, because I think that context is really important to understand the rights issues that are underlying all of this work that we do. So I'm Dene. My people are Kashogutene. And there's a story we have in our culture. There's a hill that's probably 150 miles or so northwest of here, kind of at the start of the Barren Lands. It's like a big esker, and on the top of this hill there's a small lake, and it's a red lake, like the water's kind of red. And there's a legend associated with that place. Before we were a distinct nation, all of the Arctic peoples were one nation, were one group, and they were staying on that hill. And there's these two little kids, and they're playing with bow and arrow, and they're shooting at an owl, and one of them hits this owl, but they don't know who, and they start arguing over this, and their argument escalates into a full-on fight, and then the adults start getting involved, and it gets to the point where it becomes a war. It's like a big battle happening on top of this hill, until eventually the elders step in and stopped it. And after that, people decided to go different ways. They say there's like the young people went north and they became the Inuit, and that's why they're so agile. And they say the kids went to Bear Lake and became Satuatene, and that's why they're so energetic. And the elders stayed around here and became Kashogutene. And they say that because there was that huge battle there, that's why the lake on top of that hill is red. Like to this day, it's still red. And this is a very important story for our people, because it talks about the genesis of our nation and where we come from, because it informs us about our relationships to the other Arctic Indigenous peoples who live up here, who we interact with and share land with in some cases. And it teaches us about different aspects of Dene law. But the key thing that I want to underscore to take away from that is that the story is place-based. It is related specifically to that one place, to that lake on top of that hill. And when people go on the land and they go to a place like that, they will tell that story. And that is an essential part of pedagogy. It's how we learn. It is how knowledge is passed down from generation to generation, is by going on the land to these different places and telling those stories. Our history is literally written on the land. And there are thousands of places on the land that have unique place names and have stories associated with them. There are literally thousands of places like that. There's rocks on our land that used to be people. And some of these rocks you're not even supposed to go near. And there's another rock that you're supposed to stop at every time you travel past and make offering. And we also have stories like that about the animals. So there was a time when the world was new, like a long time ago, when people and animals used to talk to each other. We used to be able to communicate. And so we have these relationships with animals that go back to then. And a lot of the knowledge that we have comes from the animals, was given to us by the animals. And so in the Dene way of life, animals have full agency and autonomy. They are characters in our story on the same level as people. There's no hierarchy there. And so telling these stories, going on the land to those specific places and telling these stories related to those places, or telling these stories about the animals we are interacting with, that is how people pass on our history and our culture and our spirituality to future generations. And it's also essential to actually learning the language. To learn to speak the Dene language, you need to be out there hunting. You need to be on the land. You need to be talking about these places that have unique place names. So without access to the land and to these thousands of places and these animals that our ancestors have had relationships with for countless generations, if we lose that, we lose the ability to pass on who we are as a people. If we lose that, we would lose our language, our culture, and our spirituality. And those things are fundamental, universal human rights. Your language, your culture, and your spirituality. Those are universal human rights. And it is incredibly important to acknowledge that everyone has those rights, but for us, they manifest differently because they are intimately connected with the land. Our ability to have those things that make us Dene requires us to be on the land. And I wanted to highlight that connection we have with the land. And I should say the land is everything. Like when you hear a Dene talking about the land, like they're going on the land, that's the water, it's the animals, trees, everything. If we're out there, we're on the land, even if we're traveling by boat. But that connection of those fundamental human rights to the land is why Indigenous peoples have special, unique rights that non-Indigenous peoples don't. So the international community has acknowledged that Indigenous people have these special collective rights. And this is, for example, rights to self-determination and rights to land. And it is because these rights are a tool to protect these same universal human rights that everyone else has. It's just that without those specific rights as a tool, we would be at risk of severe infringement of our rights because of the destruction of the land and the loss of our access to the land. And so this relates to the doctrine of free, prior, and informed consent as well. I think that's an incredibly important thing to be discussing, but I think it is misunderstood, and worse than that, I think it's purposely misrepresented. It is often referred to as a veto, but it's not a veto. When Indigenous peoples withhold consent, that is a positive exercise of their jurisdiction and authority to protect their language, culture, and spirituality. They have made a decision that some proposed activity would have a severe enough impact to the land that it would somehow impact their fundamental human rights. And they are making a conscious decision to withhold consent in order to protect those rights. It should be reframed as that, like, a recognized jurisdiction that we have to protect those things that are important to us. And I would compare that to settler governments, who will often, in a sense, withhold consent for things like pipelines. And it is very, very rarely, if ever, framed as a veto. If one province says, we're not going to let that pipeline through, the news doesn't say such and such province vetoes a pipeline. And it's because the mainstream settler society recognizes the legitimacy of those settler governments to have jurisdiction over those issues. And we need to reframe the conversation on free, prior, and informed consent so that the mainstream settler society recognizes our jurisdiction to protect our rights to language, culture, and spirituality. And so I wanted to highlight that because I think that's going to be relevant to some of the tar sands issues we're hopefully going to cover in the next 12 minutes. And I think it's going to be incredibly important at this point in time. And as people start to discuss things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and whether or how that has any application in Canadian law. So Jesse, I'm wondering if you would give like the Cliff's Notes version of what is the tar sands and tailings for people.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. That was an excellent just understanding, deeper understanding of even the animals, and so thank you for that. One thing I wanted to add to, and we're seeing a lot of this, is that it also needs to be clear when we're talking about rights, that as Daniel has really nicely articulated, that Indigenous people have special rights and why we have special rights. I'm seeing this a lot in meetings where industry is saying we're rights holders, and I had to clarify that and say you are not rights holders. Indigenous people are rights holders. Industry are leaseholders. And it's getting really scary out there because these are corporations that have personhood. So a river doesn't even have personhood. So a river cannot be protected in court. Nobody can say that this river has a spirit or is a living being, but a corporation in a colonial court can be seen as a person and a living being, such as whatever corporation you want to pick. And so that's the thinking that they have these rights. And so I had to clarify that actually just yesterday, is no, you guys are leaseholders. You are not rights holders, because they want to show up at these tables and these conversations and talk about their rights. And it's like, these are Indigenous rights to land. That's why I'm wearing this shirt too on Land Back. It's like Arthur Manuel wrote the book. It's check it out. I don't know the title of the book, man. Do you know the title of the book, Daniel, offhand? Anyway, it's Arthur Manuel. And he highlights in there the research that they've done, that out of all of the land called Canada, only 2% are the First Nations and the Métis. Like, that's where we're living on 2% of all of that land, and that's all stolen land. And we're saying we need land back, and people are like, oh no. And it's like, if you only knew I can't think of the English word, but just the injustice and the inequity of how much land Europeans have taken and the colonizers have taken compared to what First Nations have. And this is what I'm saying, is we're busting at the seams in our communities because we've been forced onto these small plots of land you know, in the early 1800s, and this is like satellite cremation, and it's like this tiny plot of land, and it's all this farmland surrounded by it, and these farmers are like doing really well, they're wealthy. One family owns like what, you know, 40 families. I did the math one time, I'll bring it up, but it's like so imbalanced. Like one farming family owns the amount of like what 100 families in Saddle Lake are living on. That's the imbalance of stolen land. And we want to continue our rights of hunting, fishing, and trapping, but we need the land to do it. We don't want to become cities and towns in our First Nations and communities. We don't want to have houses everywhere. We want to still have land. So what that means is we need more land back to be able to keep up with our populations, because when the First Nations were being made, that was at the height of genocide. So all of the kids were stolen and taken to residential schools. All you had was the adults. So they were like, okay, well, there's 100, you know, Satellite Cree Nation members. So you only need this much land. Well, we're recovering from genocide. There's all these babies being born, all these families, and we don't fit in these small plots of land. And so when that's the immediate need of land back, is like when we say land back, that's an immediate need. So I just wanted to highlight that. So to talk about the tar sands and the tailings ponds, I'll quickly tell you that in 5 minutes. Is the tar sands is the biggest industrial project on the planet. We have references to back that up because we work with a diverse group of people. We work with environmental organizations, with First Nations, all these people, and so, you know, they come with their different skills. And so it's the biggest industrial project on the planet, and it's in Treaty 8 territory in what's called Northern Alberta. And they are extracting bitumen. So we don't call it oil sands because they don't extract oil. They extract bitumen, which is this really thick, black, tarry substance. And they extract that and they ship it away for processing to make it into oil or refining or whatever. And through that extraction of bitumen, there's huge cumulative impacts. So there's a lot of deforestation, fresh water use, there's air emissions, all kinds of like toxic stuff coming out in the air. There's the removal and destruction of wetlands, and all of this, this biodiversity and home for all of the living beings is destroyed. And through all that processing, because they use a lot of fresh water, there's this byproduct, and it's called tailings. And this tailings, since the beginning of the tar sands, which really started in about the 1950s, they would have all this byproduct, and it's growing and growing and growing and growing. You can find the report on our website, which we helped with. We didn't author it though. Environmental Defense and CPAWS Alberta authored a tailings mapping report to look at from the 1950s how much the tailings ponds have grown. They don't know how to treat these. The industry has not been able to provide a way to say we can treat these toxic tailings ponds. So they're growing on the landscape. They call them ponds, but they're not a pond and they're not a lake, but they're the size of a lake, and they're toxic. Anything that lands on them will die. They cannot be, you can't be even near them to breathe them because it's so toxic even in the air. It's really surreal up in the tar sands. Like we've done healing walks to walk through there, and it's like Mordor. Like they have, like, you hear gunshot sounds on a regular basis because that's one of the deterrents they use to keep the birds from landing. And you have like a lot of desert landscape of what used to be boreal forest, and this is just like sand. It looks like a desert. And then you have these tailings ponds. And the most disturbing thing about it all is there is a First Nation called Fort McKay, which is completely in the middle of all of this. And it's just a really surreal, disturbing thing to see, because it's like you go, you know, half a kilometer out of the community either way, and you're completely surrounded by these massive industrial corporations like Suncor and Syncrude and all of these things, and the kids that go to school. So there's schools in Fort McKay, but then there's also kids that go to school in Fort McMurray. They have to drive through that every single day, you know, and we've heard from youth in the media, and it's like it impacts their mental health big time. And so these tailings ponds, the Alberta government is now proposing to dump them in the Athabasca River because they're saying, we found a way to treat them now. Our industry has found a way to treat them so that they can be, you know, I don't even know how to explain it because it's not logical, but they're saying it's like, it's still in a treatable state, but it's not as harmful. And so we mobilized really quickly and got together with the science community, the independent science community, who looked at all of the information that the industry was providing. And what we found is that it's in no way going to be safe. There's something called naphthenic acid, which is cancer causing, high levels of saline, which is like salt. You don't put that in fresh water. And then more recently, one of the scientists we're working with, there's heavy metals. Lots of heavy metals, which, you know, our bodies aren't meant to take in heavy metals in high amounts, and nobody is, no living being is. And so we're telling the government, so Daniel, myself, Keepers of the Water, other organizations, we've been letting the Alberta government know and letting the federal government know that this is not safe. We are completely against any dumping of any tailings into the Athabasca River. We want to see any independent science, but that we don't want dumping as an option. Like if you guys can really treat it to water, then just keep using it, because the tar sands uses so much fresh water. So if you go back to the beginning of my presentation, when I talked about the founding of the Keepers of the Water, the communities were seeing the water levels drop, and upstream from that is the tar sands. And it's estimated, this is a minimal estimation. They say that it takes 6 barrels of fresh water to make 1 barrel of bitumen, but we've heard higher numbers than that. We've heard like 10 barrels of fresh water. So they're taking massive amounts of fresh water. So now they're saying, well, they can treat it and make it into water. So what we're telling them is, if you can make it into water, then recycle it. So it's interesting because now the federal government, we're happy to hear this, is now they realize this is like a massive liability. It will be an international human rights crime, is what we are calling it, if this is allowed to happen, because it will forever change the northern landscape. And so now the federal government is saying, we better not dump this, because this has to happen with both the federal and the provincial government allowing it to happen. And so now the federal government is rolling up their sleeves and doing the work to say, what other industry, you tell us what other options are out there to treat the tailings. And I'll just wrap up, is we've had many people come to us like out of the cracks of the wood to say, I know how to treat the tailings. I have this science technology. The thing that we're learning is that the industry has been given other options to treat these tailings ponds, but it comes down to money. Is that there's apparently ways to treat these tailings ponds, but that it's going to cost these companies too much money, so they don't want to do it. So they want to do what's cheapest and fastest so that they can continue extracting these fossil fuels at a completely unsustainable rate. And so that's one of the things that we're involved in when it comes to how are we protecting water, is we're doing all these educational workshops. Like we have the university, if you go to our events, like we have these in-person workshops, and we have this legal summit. We're talking about doing a healing walk again next year in the tar sands. So we haven't had one since 2014. If you guys Google tar sands healing walk, you'll get a good idea of the walks and what we're potentially planning for 2023. So I'll let Daniel take over. Hopefully you guys got the point that there's massive amounts of tailings ponds in northeastern Alberta in the tar sands. They're highly toxic, and the Alberta government wants to start dumping them into the Athabasca River.
Yeah, and that's the key issue, is this proposal to release what they're calling treated tailings into the watershed. But as Jesse said, the treated tailings are still toxic. And that's like there's some important background there that I think people should know, because as Jesse said, like this issue has been growing. The tailings have been growing since the 1950s, and people never had any clear plan. The corporations, the governments never had a clear plan to deal with these tailings. They were saying, let's just dump it in these pits and make these artificial lakes. And they have grown to the point where there is now, I think it's 1.4 trillion liters of tailings stored in these lakes. That's trillion with a T. It's just a ridiculous amount of toxic waste that nobody ever wanted to deal with and never created a plan to deal with. And it is illegal under Canada's federal legislation, the Canadian Fisheries Act, to release this tailings into the water. It's considered under that legislation what they call a deleterious substance, which is anything that's harmful to aquatic life. And even the treated tailings with the contaminants that Jesse talked about in them are considered deleterious. So it's illegal to release even the treated tailings into fish-bearing waters. Now there's industry provided data that the same organization Jesse was talking about, Environmental Defense, scrounged up back in 2008 and wrote a report on. And what they figured out is that at that point in time, 11 million liters a day of tailings water was leaking from the tailings ponds. And a lot of that water is recaptured by pumps and different mechanisms that these companies have to basically pump back the water that's leaking out. But a lot of it doesn't get recaptured and ends up soaking into the groundwater. And so Environmental Defense wrote this report and then authored a complaint to the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, which is a body formed under NAFTA that will investigate complaints about one of those three countries, Canada, Mexico, and the USA, failing to enforce environmental legislation. So the substance of the complaint that Environmental Defense authored was that Canada has this Fisheries Act that prohibits the release of these toxic substances into fish-bearing waters. And there's potentially millions of liters leaking a day and soaking into the groundwater. So that was like a decade-long process of getting that commission to actually investigate and author a report. And they did corroborate a lot of what Environmental Defense had found. But there was kind of this key last piece of the puzzle, which was being able to conclusively say that any contaminants that are in the river are directly coming from these leaking tailings in the tailings ponds. There is no way to conclusively establish that. And so they couldn't say for sure that it's ending up in the river. All they could say is there's contaminants in the river and there's tailings water that's seeping into the groundwater, but we can't link them conclusively for sure. Shortly after that, because I think that report came out in 2019 or 2021, it was fairly recently. It was very shortly after that Canada came out with this proposal to release regulations under its Fisheries Act that would effectively legalize the dumping of these treated tailings into the watershed. So there was this like decades-long history of allegations that they're not enforcing their own laws with respect to some of the largest corporations in the world and their activities. And instead of actually making kind of a coordinated effort at all levels of government to enforce their laws or do what that legislation is supposed to do, which is protect the water, they are proposing to legalize the pollution in a sense. And so that is the big issue. I just want to also flag that they do have a working group with Indigenous nations who are all within the boundaries of the land claimed by Alberta. And the government of Canada has been working with those nations on this issue, but they are not including in this work, not yet at least, any Indigenous nations who are further downstream in the Bora's what's called Northwest Territories. So even though we are downstream, at this point, Canada has not made a concerted effort to even engage people, let alone consult or seek to obtain any type of consent to this activity. And so that's a message that's coming out from Dene further downstream, is that Canada does need the consent of all downstream Indigenous peoples before they could proceed with this legislative mechanism that would allow for the release of these treated tailings. I do want to say though that Jesse and myself and others have been meeting with staff from these departments with Canada's federal government, and I do have to give those staff credit for at least the work they're doing with the Indigenous nations further south, because they have, in the year or so we've been talking to them fairly regularly, they have shifted their original proposal based on the input that those nations have given them, and they have done things like expand the scope of their kind of analysis beyond just aquatic life, which is usually what's looked at under the Fisheries Act, and are actually looking at things like impacts to human health, which is not something they've ever done under that legislation before. But again, the approach that Canada is taking is inadequate if, first of all, they're not seeking and putting a requirement on themselves to obtain the consent of impacted Indigenous people, and two, if they are not seeking that consent from all of the Indigenous people downstream who would ultimately be impacted by this move. So I will leave it at that. I think we should try and leave some time here for questions.
Thank you so much. We have a couple questions here. Fatima asks, how did the tailings form?
So the tailings, like I don't have the science technical answer, but that's a good question, and something that we'll get on our website. It may already be on our website because we have a tailings section. We have a science lead who works with us who knows the the technicalities of the tailings. But what I can tell you in summary, because we've been doing this work for a long time, is it's just basically the waste of the extraction. So it's a sludge, it's a slurry of all of the chemicals that they're using, because they use a lot of chemicals in the extraction process. And so it's like they bring in what our science lead Paul Belanger has told us is they're bringing in blocks. So if you Google the tar sands or the oil sands, you'll see these big yellow blocks. That's the salt that they're bringing in. So there's like high levels of salt in all these heavy metals, because metals are in the ground. So the further you dig, and now they're in what's called unconventional oil. So when they started in the 50s, they didn't have to go very far to get to the bitumen. That's all gone. They've taken all that. So now it's unconventional oil. And why it's unconventional is because it uses a massive amount of resources like water and methane and all of these other things to extract that bitumen, because they're going even further down. And so then you're getting into more of the heavy metals that are in the ground, and like, in my opinion, the heavy metals are meant to be in the ground, like we're not meant to be extracting far down. And you see a lot of that happening in Northwest Territories now. Like there's all this mineral or metal exploration to give us the technology that we have today, but we're not living in a sustainable technology. Like it's nothing to just go replace something and not think twice of where that comes from. Well, that's taking out all these heavy metals. And in every extraction process, there is waste left over from that. And it's just everything put together. So that's my untechnical response. However, if it's not on our website, we'll get that up on our website, because we do have that information.
Thank you for that. And then our next question from Sarah is, has anyone done studies on the groundwater contamination movement around the tailing ponds?
Daniel, maybe you can talk about our conversation with enforcement is like how they're trying to look at that based on the report, and just how they are even having a hard time getting access on site.
Yeah, so I'm not a scientist, and I like Jesse. Jesse talks to all the scientists for us. But I have looked at some of the studies, and I'm not aware of anyone who has done groundwater studies. But part of my guess about that would be, as Jesse said, it's hard to get access. So you've got the Athabasca River, and then it's kind of straddled on both sides by these massive industrial operations that are effectively owned or leased out to these massive fossil fuel corporations, and they don't let people just wander around and do research there. I know about 10 years ago, when I was looking more into the science, there was some research done by, I think it was David Schindler and Aaron Kelly. I think it was their research, where they had to take samples from the river by helicopter because they couldn't just like go to the river from the shore because it's all these company leases. So I'm not aware of any studies that have been done like that, but I think it would be prohibitive to be able to do those studies just because of the lack of access that Jesse was talking about. She brought up another really good point, though, which is that Environment and Climate Change Canada has an enforcement division whose job includes doing things like recommending charges under the Fisheries Act when people do release things into fish-bearing waters. And we spoke with someone in that division who had a lot of very good information. And one of the things they told us was that in the last decade, the scientists that they work with in that department have been working on ways to do what they call fingerprinting of the contaminants that are in the Athabasca River, so that they can actually say with certainty where they came from. So what I was saying before about it can't be conclusively shown that the contaminants in the river are coming from the tailings ponds, it sounds like Environment Climate Change Canada scientists have been trying to crack that very nut and are coming up with ways where they can look at not just the contaminants, like not just things like hydrocarbons, which can and do exist naturally in places like the Athabasca River. And it's the same here too, like on the big river that they show, you go down there and you stop at the shore, you will see oil like on the shore, because there is natural seepage in some places. So just finding hydrocarbons itself in the river doesn't prove that the tailings ponds are leaking. So they are trying to find other chemicals or compounds or things in the water that do not occur naturally and that could only have come from the tailings ponds, so that they can actually link seepage from the ponds to the water in the river. So they haven't done actual groundwater studies, but it sounds like they have done these kind of fingerprinting techniques so that they can make that link, even if they don't have a map of where the groundwater is flowing.
And just to add to that, so what they said is it's not even easy for them to get access because they were the ones following up on this report Daniel talked about that was first there was a report written by Environmental Defense and then prompted the CEC to do a report which proved that, or showed that the tailings are leaking. And so now it's up to the feds to press charges. But what they're saying is they need to do their due diligence and that it's not easy. Industry does not want to be linked to these harmful chemicals leaking into the Athabasca River, so they're not making it easy. And so any question of like independent science, like that's out of the question, and that's a huge issue. And that's why we're saying is like industry just says this is how it is, and we don't trust industry, and there needs to be independent science. That's partially why we launched our independent monitoring program to be, because the Alberta government and the federal government, they have this joint oil sands monitoring program, and there's a lot of issues with that. They're not monitoring where they need to be. They're not monitoring what they need to be monitoring. So even like some heavy metals, like it's crazy how they're not doing the proper monitoring. And just the structure of the monitoring. So I know that there were a couple environmental organizations sitting at this stakeholder table, this oil sands monitoring stakeholder table, which gave it some credibility, but they were even looking at walking away from this monitoring program because it's like a really weak program. It's not doing what it's supposed to do, because aside from monitoring, it's like stopping it from happening. So just exactly what environmental defense did and the CEC is like, yeah, the tailings are leaking, but then that's where we fall into this all the time with monitoring programs that are done by the government, is they don't have any kind of enforcement. And if they do, it takes like 10 or 20 years. And then there's that much more cumulative impacts that have been damaged that has been happening. So that has to change, enforcement on when we know that things are happening.
To continue from the last question, Sarah has said, so the oil companies can deny the government research agencies access to take samples?
No, but it's the process that they have. It's like getting into like NASA probably is the way we have. It's been not, they haven't used those exact words, but it's not just, you don't just walk into site, and it's not a easy process. So that's the impression that I got, is that even for the feds, when it comes to like, we're gonna come and check if your tailings are leaking and harmful, then it's like it's a very rigorous kind of process to even get on site and do that. Maybe that's an excuse. I don't know. Like, we don't really know, because none of us have access to this. Like, that's what we're saying, is like, we want some of our independent scientists to be able to go and do sampling and do testing, and that's for some reason out of the question.
Yeah, and I haven't read the whole Fisheries Act, but I imagine that it's probably similar to other legislation, like things like wildlife acts, where different government officials would have the authority to enter a company's property for the purposes of investigating things. But as Jesse said, even if you have that authority, it's not like, it's still difficult to exercise it, because you would have to make sure that, like, those government officials would have to make sure that they're well within their authority under the act, because they're up against some of the world's richest corporations. It's not like police who can just shake down people who don't have the ability to hire lawyers. These companies are able to ensure that the government of Canada is not, like, it is following the procedures that they have to follow to say, we are going to go on there and take these samples and actually investigate the situation with potential leaks here.
Thank you for that. Our next question is, do you have any resources available on your website for individuals who want to try to fight against the harmful practices of the tar sands?
So under our work, we have a tailings and tar sands tab, and in there, because people, once they learn about it, they're just totally mortified of like that this is even a thing, and they're like, how can I help? And so we're working to have different ways to help. One of the ways is there's a sign-on letter that you can sign on, which goes directly to the federal environment minister and the deputy minister. That's his file, the deputy minister. And the letter is already written, so you can just sign on to it, which is you voicing that you are against any dumping of the tailings into the Athabasca River. And there's other ways to help. Like we're a growing organization, so we need financial resources, attending our online events. We have many online events to continue to get educated, to continue to speak out, and take it in your own hands. Like, this is a people thing. If you guys want to host a rally on this, like if you want to host an action outside your legislative building in your community, or even the municipal building, whatever, you have access to, we need to get back out on the streets. I know the governments have worked really hard, and I believe the companies a lot are behind this to get us off the streets. And COVID made a hit on that as well. Now we're post COVID, hopefully, and it's time to get back out in the streets. It's time to be visible in a non-violent way. And that's what Daniel does. He does non-violent direct action. We are not violent people, but we need to be visible and out there, and for people to see. The one thing I wanted to mention, I took an economics course last fall, and in this economics course, we were taught, we were talking about corporations, and just how these corporations are getting bigger and bigger, and it's scary because they feel like they have all of these rights, and they're even trying to supersede Indigenous rights and human rights to water, for example. And they did a psychological study on these corporations, and they came out as psychopaths. And so it's like, search it. It's out there on the internet of this study that's been done. I didn't do it. I'm just passing on the information that these corporations don't care about us as people. They care about money. And so in the tar sands, these past couple years, they've had record-breaking profits. So they're making massive amounts of money, and part of it is because we hadn't been out in the streets, because we have the power. The people have the power to the people. So we need to take our power back collectively to work to protect the land and water, because it's our responsibility to protect the future generations. Because unfortunately, these corporations, and we've seen it time and time again in meetings that we sit in, their focus is making money. They are very disconnected from the water and the land and the communities that are impacted by this. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say that.
I'd like to add something very briefly, which is I would encourage everybody to get the message out there that free, prior, and informed consent means consent. It means that consent is required in these situations where there's a risk of serious impacts to rights. Then consent is an absolute requirement. I think that's important I think it's important for people to talk about that and understand that and support that position and communicate that to your political representatives in Canadian governments. And like, if you are Canadian, if you do identify as Canadian, then your government has passed legislation that puts obligations on them to uphold certain minimum standards under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that's very controversial legislation amongst Indigenous people. And the declaration itself is controversial amongst Indigenous people. But if you are Canadian, then that's your government, and they agreed to do that. And you should tell them that free, prior, informed consent means that in this type of situation, consent is mandatory. It's not just the duty to consult under another name. It means there is a requirement to obtain consent in this type of situation.
And just to get you guys thinking about, well, where do we go from here? And that's a big part of our work as well, because it's like, we have family that work in the tar sands and the forest industry or whatever, because those are the industries that have kind of been forced upon our people and been given the time and attention. Our generation is like, we know this isn't sustainable. This is not going to help the future generations. We need clean water. We need we need land, we need forests. So our generation understands that. So there's a lot of people that have been working really hard to look at, what does diversifying the economy look like? Because these are unsustainable, non-renewable resources. And so that's a presentation we're doing. Check on our website. We have a symposium coming up in November in our 3 series at the university. The third one is, where do we go from here? What does the world look like as we move away from fossil fuel extraction? And so I'm looking forward to that, because there's going to be some amazing speakers, which will help us get us thinking of what can this diversifying the economy in this future look like?
Thank you for that. We had one person ask, as a US citizen, is there anything that a non-Canadian can do to help?
It's a global issue. I mean, because even the amount of emissions that the tar sands is emitting it becomes a global issue. So it affects everybody. Like I said, it's the biggest industrial project on the planet, and we're not in this alone. There's a lot of people that have been mobilizing and working on this for years and years of like understanding how detrimental this is to the environment. So I don't have any suggestions offhand, but I know that there's organizations like 350.org, Indian Collective, Indigenous Environmental Network. They have US based places. So, if you want to reach out to them and see, like, let them know you're concerned about what's happening with the tar sands, they have done work in the tar sands throughout the years of trying to raise awareness of what's happening. So maybe you can reach out to them. Winona LaDuke, she's another one. Honor the Earth, she's one organization. So that's just what I can think of.
I would recommend that you support some of the pipeline struggles down there. I think Line 3 is a tar sands pipeline, and it was Indigenous and non-Indigenous allies support south of the border that really shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, and that was a tar sands pipeline, and that has been the continental strategy for over a decade. To address the tar sands is to not go directly to the source, but to stop expansion by not allowing this vast network of pipelines that have been proposed all over the continent to ship this oil out. And a lot of those struggles have been successful. And that tar sands synthetic oil is very similar to heavy crude that comes from places like Venezuela. So at the continental scale, the refineries that are really capable of dealing with that oil are mostly on the Gulf Coast. So the plan has been to either ship this diluted bitumen out of ports on the West Coast, like in BC, or run it through pipelines to the Gulf Coast for those refineries, because there aren't refineries really on this side of the border that are capable of handling that type of crude. That's my understanding. So basically, tar sands oil is all for export somewhere. So I would say if you want to support this struggle, then support those people who are trying to stop the Line 3 pipeline and stay apprised of what pipelines are crossing the border that are going to be shipping this diluted bitumen south.
And then we have one more question here. Do you have any recommendations for resources that explain how people can integrate water protection practices into their daily lives?
That's something that we need to build on our website. I mean, we talk about it in our presentations, and that's what we say is it starts in your home. And capitalism is like it's like this monster, right? It's hard to take down. We're all impacted by capitalism. So when you go into your store, you have all like I think one of the most toxic aisles is the laundry detergent aisle, because you have like Downy and Bounce. Bounce has formaldehyde in it and like these really harmful chemicals which go into our water systems. Thankfully, there's more options becoming available with, and of course there's greenwashing where it's like, oh, I'm not harmful to the environment, but it really is. So that's where we have like I thought about that, but that's a whole other research project. If somebody wants to help partner with us and take it on, that will require research of what is really truly environmentally friendly for the water when it comes to like shampoos and all of these things that people use in their day-to-day lives. We would love to have a section like that on our website. Something as simple as baking soda in your as a replacement for laundry detergent, not using Bounce at all. Like we need to kind of change our way of thinking. That's decolonizing, which everyone can do, is decolonize our minds and our relationship to water. So yeah, I would love to have a research project on that so that we can get that resource up on our website.
Sorry, there was one more question. I just missed it. Some First Nations governments in Treaty 8 that signed a historic agreement with Alberta government through the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporations regarding partnership with the ownership of the oil sands. How does this agreement impact the work with Keepers of the Water?
That was there was no consultation done with the community people. So 23 First Nations and Métis settlements signed on to this agreement. We can see through the workings of it. This is to seek social license to appear that the communities are all for the oil extraction and the fossil fuel industry, and that's simply not true. I'm talking to other people from communities, and they have also not been consulted. And so what I was informed of is that Enbridge made it illegal to speak to consult with the community people until this deal was signed. So there's huge liabilities and legal implications because of non-consultation. You know, and maybe it's about how colonialism is impacting the way that we communicate with each other in our communities. So industry is setting a really dangerous precedence to say that it's okay not to talk to your people. It's okay not to come together as a community and talk through these issues. And maybe one community would have a referendum vote, and then, you know, the majority would say, yeah, let's sign on to it. But maybe one wouldn't, and we won't know and until there's consultation. And this is like what we're talking about, is free, prior, and informed consent. That has to come down on the community level as well. And it's because of colonization that these structures were created, where it's like giving the authority to 5 people to speak on behalf of our community. And so, you know, because of that lack of consultation, like, we don't know the details of the agreement, we don't know the liabilities. So that's a discussion that's evolving on the community level, because there's more and more people that are coming forward to say, what? Like, some people still don't even know about it. Like, we found out about it in the media. So it's really harmful. And how does it impact our work? I mean, we see stuff like this all the time. It's like, you don't become immune to it. It just gives us more reason to want to do our work.
Thank you for that. That was our last question. Thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone that joined us today. And thank you so much, Jesse and Daniel, for the amazing discussion. It was great to learn about Keepers of the Water, Dene rights and sovereignty, and how to exercise our rights as Indigenous people for water and land, and learning about the tar sands and how they impact the aquifers and the water around the Northwest Territories and Alberta. So just before we end the webinar, we'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming learning circles. Our upcoming one is co-building cultural competency and Indigenous engagement in the CANSOLVE CDK network on October 25th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we have Plains Indian Sign Language and Storytelling with Floyd Favell. That's on November 1st at 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then we have Sobriety and Indigenous Perspective with Jade and Leora. That's on November 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And Healing Happens Here, Decolonizing Primary Care Through Indigenous Land-Based Health Programs in Urban Spaces with Vancouver Aboriginal Health Society. And that's with Marlee. That's at November 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And sign up for our newsletter. The link will be in the chat. All the webinars are free to sign up for at our website at www.learningsircle.ubc.ca. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next Learning Circle. Lim Limt, thank you. Bye.